Hello and welcome back to the UiPath Production Ready Essentials training. In the previous lessons, we've learned what selectors are, how they're generated, and when they might require fine-tuning to work effectively. We'll proceed to some of the most common ways to repair selectors, to make sure that the correct UI elements are identified in as many automation scenarios as possible. We'll start by creating a workflow that removes the double spaces in a Notepad document using some UI interaction activities, which generate selectors, as we already know. Afterwards, we'll fine-tune the selectors that identify the application in such a way as to make our workflow applicable to multiple Notepad files. We'll use this file here. Let's add a sequence to the Designer panel and rename it to Sequence Notepad. We'll also add a short workflow description as an annotation. Moving on, let's search for an Attach Window activity and indicate our Notepad file. We'll also change the name of the activity to follow the best practices. Now, to remove the double spaces in the text file, we'll use the Replace command, whose shortcut is Ctrl+H. We can automate that action in Studio using the Send hotkey activity. Now, the robot must fill in the fields in this pop-up window, so we'll add two Type Into activities. Since we need to find all the double spaces, the string that we'll enter in the first field consists of two spaces, which must be placed between quotation marks. The second Type Into activity will instruct our robot to enter a single space in the Replace With field. And now we can move on to a click activity to select the Replace All button. After performing all of those steps, we can close the pop-up window using one more click activity. We'll save and run our workflow to see how the execution goes. Alright, it works. But what if we want to remove the double spaces in a different file? Well, let's try that out. We'll simply close this file and open a different one. And run the workflow again. This time, the selector was not found. Let's take a closer look at the selectors to see what's wrong and try to repair them. We can notice that the title attribute comprises the name of the previous file. Let's click the Repair button and select the new Notepad file. If we look at the selector now, we can see that the first two characters in the title were replaced by an asterisk. This illustrates the use of selectors with wildcards. An asterisk replaces several characters, while a question mark replaces a single one. The workflow is executed successfully this time. Now, let's see what happens when we open the third file, which has an entirely different name. The title of the previous two files were similar, and the selector wildcard only replaced the two characters that differed from one file to the other. As a result, the value of the selector attribute still contains a part of the file name. Let's open the Selector Editor menu to make some adjustments. Instead of clicking Repair, as we did before, we can edit the attribute manually. In this case, we can remove the timestamp altogether. And the selector is valid, so let's click OK and run the workflow. And it worked! And that was all for today. In the next tutorial, we'll automate an application and learn how to create dynamic selectors. Stay tuned!